Have you ever searched small towns in Europe? Or maybe how to retire in a small European town? If you did, you probably learned you have to do a lot of traveling and jump through some hoops. If that's not your thing, you could still sort of do that here in the United States. You see, there are these towns across the country that have taken on a European feel. Typically, it's because the founders were from whatever country and they built the town the way they did things back home. Over the decades and centuries, these towns held on to their roots. And now we have European-looking towns here in the USA. Today we look at 10 of them. Now to be honest, there's probably about 60 to 100 of them, but I'm only doing 10 really cool ones. If there's one you'd like to see covered on another list, let me know in the comments section. Let's take a look. Number 10, Lindsborg, Kansas. The Kansas Prairie doesn't warn you about this one. One minute you're driving past miles of farmland and grain elevator, the next minute a bright red dollar horse statue appears beside the road like a polite hallucination. You slow down partly for curiosity and partly because your brain needs to reboot. Lindsborg doesn't look like a themed town. It looks like a memory from somewhere else that wandered inland and decided the rent was reasonable. The story starts in 1869 when Swedish immigrants arrived looking for farmland and stability. The railroad had just pushed through central Kansas, and land agents advertised the region back in Europe as fertile and affordable. What the brochure left out was the wind and the tornadoes. The settlers showed up anyway, planted wheat, and then did something unusual for immigrant communities in the American West. They didn't slowly blend away. They doubled down. Churches held services in Swedish for decades. Newspapers were printed in Swedish. The local college, Bethany, became a cultural anchor that kept traditions from drifting off into the prairie. Instead of fading, the identity condensed. Over time, the town decorated itself the way a memory decorates your childhood. Murals appeared. Storefronts leaned into the Nordic design. Dollar horses multiplied across the town like they were migrating. Even the pace changed. Lindsborg feels organized in a calm way. Now, the real transformation happened in the mid-20th century when the town realized its heritage wasn't just history, it was a magnet. Rather than modernize the town, Lindsborg leaned into its roots and marketed itself as Little Sweden, USA. And it worked. Today, the town of about 3,500 residents welcome roughly 150 to 200,000 visitors a year, depending on the festival schedule and weather cooperation. That means on big weekends, the population temporarily increases by a factor of everybody park in a field. The biggest draw is Hilling Fest. I hope I pronounced that right. It's held every other October since 1941, and for a few days, the town becomes a living museum that somehow feels alive rather than staged. You got folk dancers in traditional dress, crafts, demonstrations in the streets. It's a little less of a festival and more of a collective agreement to pause modern times. You also got midsummer in June where they put up the maypole in the middle of the Kansas heat in the prairie. They dance around like a bunch of Swedish people. They have a few other festivals and a lot of them have things to do with art walks, heritage markets, seasonal events, things like that. But it's always got a Swedish theme. The charm works because the town never feels like it's performance for outsiders. Traditions exist for locals first. Visitors are just invited to sit at the table. They're just borrowing culture for the weekend. Leave town in any direction and the illusion dissolves back into Kansas in about 3 minutes. Grain silos replace carved wooden horses, pickup trucks replace tour buses, but for a moment in the middle of the continent, Sweden planted its roots deep enough that even the prairie couldn't flatten them out. Number 9, Pella, Iowa. You approach Pella the way you approach most Midwestern towns. Highway, fields, few silos, a water tower doing its civic duty. Nothing prepares you for the moment a canal appears. Not a decorative pond, a canal with arched bridges and brick storefronts that look like they expect bicycles and polite arguments about philosophy. The prairie didn't gradually change, it flipped the switch here. The story begins in 1847 when a group of Dutch settlers left the Netherlands looking for religious freedom and economic breathing room. Europe at the time was crowded and tense. Iowa was the opposite. Endless land, unpredictable weather, and opportunity disguised as hard labor. They named it Pella, a biblical place of safety, which tells you exactly how they viewed the move. They farmed immediately because you don't come to Iowa for the scenery. You come because soil behaves like an ally. But while they adopted American agriculture, they refused to abandon identity. Dutch language newspapers circulated, churches held services in Dutch for generations. Architecture stayed familiar. Instead of blending into the generic prairie grid, they rebuilt visual memory. Over decades, the town didn't just preserve the heritage, it curated it. They couldn't get enough of it. The turning point came in the early 1900s when leaders realized the culture itself was worth protecting publicly. Brick streets replaced asphalt downtown, storefronts adopted stepped gables, a canal district appeared complete with a working drawbridge. Then came the crown jewel, a giant windmill. Not a replica, an authentic 1850s Dutch windmill. It was dismantled in the Netherlands and reconstructed piece by piece in Iowa in 2002. It still grinds grain, which feels excessive in the best way possible. Today, Pella only has about 10,000 residents and welcomes about 300,000 to 400,000 visitors every single year. The major event is tulip time each May. Hundreds of thousands of tulips bloom across town in synchronized colored waves. Residents wear traditional Dutch clothing, not as much as a costume as something you just wear on a Tuesday in May. Parades roll through the streets lined with wooden shoes and pastries that operate outside the nutritional laws. The entire town becomes a living postcard and nobody breaks character. December brings Kirk's Market, which I hope I pronounced properly. It's a Christmas market that leans heavily European with lights, crafts, and winter food that convinces you cold weather is a lifestyle choice. Now, really cool thing, this isn't just some little burg. It's a decent town. It's got a college there. They've got jobs. All in all, it's a great place to live. And all their festivals and their Dutch themes, it's just like a little added bonus to living here. Pella's Main Street downtown is one of Architecture Digest's most beautiful main streets in the United States. Families here trace lineage back to those first settlers and still attend the same churches. Number 8, New Glarus, Wisconsin. In 1845, Swiss immigrants chose this patch of southern Wisconsin because the rolling hills felt close enough to home to tamp down some of the homesickness. I don't know if you could ever mistake Wisconsin for Switzerland, but it was close enough for them. They named it after the canton of Glarus, and then kept the culture alive instead of letting it fade into generic Midwest. Dairy farming fit perfectly, families spoke Swiss German for generations, and the chalet-style buildings appeared not for tourists, but because that's simply the way they knew how to build things. Decades later, the town realized its everyday life looked unusual to outsiders. Rather than modernize downtown, they leaned into it. They painted shutters, carved balconies, and storybook murals turned the street into something between a village and a fairy tale. Today, the town's got about 2,200 residents, and they see roughly 300,000 visitors each year. Many lured by the brewery, the cheese, or the rumor that the Swiss town exists where people say, "Ope." Festivals keep this town lively and something to look forward to. The William Tell Festival each Labor Day reenacts the apple legend with cheerful seriousness, and winter brings markets and sledding that only cold weather veterans enjoy. Locals run the booths, wave at strangers, and treat visitors like temporary neighbors. Eventually, someone hands you fried cheese curds, which Switzerland never invented, but Wisconsin refuses to apologize for it. I love cheese curds, especially if you get them in Wisconsin. They have some pretty good ones out here in Oregon because we do have a decent cheese scene with Tillamook and all, but it sounds like a good time. Number 7, Tarpon Springs, Florida. Greek sponge divers settled here in the early 1900s, and instead of becoming Floridians and growing mullets, they built a waterfront that looks like it was lifted from a Greek isle. Restaurants serve traditional food, Greek signage is common, and the Orthodox cathedral dominates the skyline. If you don't know where Tarpon Springs is, it's really not a town by itself, but because it's part of the Tampa metro area, but it's definitely different. It feels Mediterranean up until you start noticing the wildlife. In Greece, you see cats lounging by fishing boats. In Tarpon Springs, you see pelicans supervising lunch like unpaid health inspectors. Now, they have a bunch of sponge fishing and Greek festivals here. First of all, the 120th Epiphany celebration happened on January 6th. It starts with a dive where there's all kinds of diving events. It was founded by sponge fishermen. And of course, they go with their Greek Orthodox thing and they release a dove and then they have another dive. Then, of course, there's the Greek Independence Day Parade in March, which is a whole festival and all that. And then, of course, Night in the Islands, which features outdoor dancing, food, and music on the historic sponge docks. And this isn't the only one in Florida. They've got one of the best ones coming up. Number 6, Holland, Michigan. Dutch immigrants didn't just found Holland in 1840. They arrived like a church group that accidentally packed an entire civilization into the luggage. These immigrants were escaping economic hardships and religious restrictions back in the Netherlands. So they landed in the mosquito-heavy wilderness of Michigan and decided it would become a Dutch town complete with canals, whether the forest liked it or not. course, they had to drain some swamps, but eventually they started farming and naming streets after places an ocean away. This is another town that leaned heavy into the heritage. They didn't argue over zoning laws. They just started making canals and putting up windmills, and eventually started having the Tulip Time Festival, where the city transforms into a floral United Nations summit. The wooden shoes come out, school kids dance in outfits that look like European postcards, and of course tourists showed up by the busload. Just like the Netherlands, but with pickup trucks. For a few weeks each spring, Lake Michigan might as well be the North Sea. Then winter shows up and reminds everyone for 6 months that they moved to Michigan. If you've never heard of Holland and don't know where it is southwest of Grand Rapids, just about on Lake Michigan. It's actually on the smaller Lake Macatawa, but Lake Michigan's right there. Number 5, St. Augustine, Florida. St. Augustine didn't start off as a cute historic district. It started off as Spain planting their flag and saying, "This one's ours." And that was way back in 1565, decades before Jamestown and long before the English figured out how to starve in Virginia. St. Augustine was a military fort first and a tourist attraction for centuries later. Pirates attacked it, the British took it, the Spanish took it back, Florida changed hands like a used car, and through all of it, the town just kept stacking layers instead of replacing them. Most American cities redecorate history. St. Augustine just refuses to throw away anything at this point. They're like hoarders of history. The Castillo de San Marcos is the best example. So they made this fort out of coquina stone, which looks decorative, but really what it is seashells. Seashells that fell to the bottom of the ocean and were compressed for hundreds of thousands of years. Some way or another, they make it up to the surface eventually, and the Spanish figured out if they pulled it out of the ocean or off of an island, dried it out, it worked pretty good as a stone. So they built this place, and it was a pretty solid fort. I mean, people would come by and shot cannonballs at it when whatever war was happening, and they just kind of bounced off. Nothing shattered, really. It wasn't much damage. See, some of the walls are 9 to 18 feet thick. Cannonball might go through about 2 or 3 feet. So it really wasn't doing a lot of damage, and I'm sure if you were one of the British or whoever firing cannonballs at this fort, it's pretty depressing. These walls just absorbed the cannonballs, like a giant limestone pillow. Now the problem they have today is the streets are designed for shade and defense, not traffic flow. Modern drivers meet 1600s urban planning and immediately realize that the past did not anticipate SUVs. Now this is one of the best examples of a place holding on to its European roots. Locals grab coffee next to buildings that are older than the Constitution. Kids go to school past colonial gates. Walgreens exists within walking distance of a fortress built to fight empires. Trolley tours, guest walks, pirate museums, and wedding photography are basically the economy now. It's almost like these people are living inside a museum instead of visiting one. These days, it is a tourist town. I mean, that's their main source of income is tourism. And it'll probably be that way for a very long time. Beautiful city, though. Number 4, Solvang, California. Solvang exists because a group of Danish educators looked at the Midwest in 1911 and politely said, "We appreciate the opportunity, but we would like less blizzards, thank you very much." They bought ranch land in St. Inez Valley and built a colony where immigrants could keep language, tradition, and Lutheran roots without freezing solid every February. At first, it wasn't themed at all. Early photos show a regular farm town with wooden storefronts and dusty roads. The fairy tale look came later, especially after the 1930s and then post-World War II. When the town realized Americans would absolutely drive hours to experience Europe without passports or jet lag, they leaned in hard. Half-timbered facades replaced plain fronts. Windmills appeared, and suddenly bakeries were selling stuff I can't pronounce to people who couldn't pronounce it either, but they were willing to stand in line for it. The architects didn't copy building by building from Denmark. It's more Denmark filtered through California style. Even the famous Little Mermaid statue is a friendly cousin to Copenhagen's original rather than a strict twin. Tourism today runs the rhythm of this town. Danish Day festivals, spring parades, folk dancing, and enough pastry consumption to concern your doctor. And of course, December's Jules Fest turns the streets into a Hallmark movie set with lights, markets, and visitors pretending 60-degree weather counts as winter. Yeah, It's ridiculous. It's Southern California, okay? And my mom loved the place. So we'd been up there several times and a few times during Christmas as I was growing up, or around Christmas, and Jules Fest was going on. And they try and make it feel like it's a winter thing, but it's like you're in a t-shirt and shorts. To anyone truly from Denmark or most European countries, showing up here will make you giggle. During winter, I should say. Weekends fill with wine country travelers because vineyards surround this place. So you get cultural mashup of Danish bakeries, California wine tasting rooms, and cyclists dressed like they're preparing for the Tour de France, but they're stopping for cream puffs and wine. Yeah, it's his thing. I had friends that used to do it. They'd go ride their bikes up to Solvang, all dressed up in their little tight outfits, get up there, have a glass of wine, and complain the whole time they're there about the cars on the road. Beautiful place to go cycling, though, honestly. These days, though, the accent faded generations ago, but the recipes didn't. So Solvang ends up less like a preserved village and more like a heritage theme park that accidentally became a real community. Yeah, it's kind of cute, though. Especially when you grow up in Southern California, you just get so used to the Spanish architecture. Streets that always start with Villa or Santa. It's kind of nice to see things changed up. If you ever get a chance, definitely visit Solvang. It's a nice little town. Number 3, Santa Barbara, California. Santa Barbara didn't always look like it does now, so their situation isn't like St. Augustine where they kept the history going. Early on, this was a pretty normal California port town, a mix of wooden buildings, Victorian-style homes, and whatever else someone felt like constructing that year. Then the 1925 earthquake flattened a big portion of downtown, and the city had a rare moment of civic agreement. Basically, they decided that if they got to rebuild anyway, they might as well pick a personality and stick with it. Instead of random architecture round 2, leaders leaned into the area's Spanish and Mexican past and wrote design rules that still control construction today. If you build in much of Santa Barbara, the building has to look like it belongs in the same extended family as everything else. That's why the red tile roofs and white stucco aren't just decoration, they're policy. The courthouse, probably the most famous building in town, was intentionally designed like a romantic colonial palace. Arches, murals, towers, gardens. It's a government building that tourists line up to photograph, which tells you how serious they were about this commitment to the Spanish architecture. Even chain stores get gently forced into costumes. Instead of looking for a typical McDonald's building or something, whatever business, you're looking for logos because you can't distinguish the business right away by what the building looks like. Tourism here runs on consistency. Visitors come for beaches, but stay because the whole place feels curated. State Street functions like an outdoor set where people shop, eat, and wander around pretending they just discovered coastal Spain without flying overseas. Cruise passengers pour in, which this is one I have not gone to yet, and I really like to go to this cruise port. But wine country is like 20 minutes away, and the mission up the hill quietly reminds everyone the region was part of New Spain long before California became a brand. Yeah, a lot of the cruise ships stop here when they're going up the Pacific coast, and a lot of them call it wine tours or the wine cruise. So Santa Barbara's got some rules that keep the town beautiful. So it sort of feels like a Spanish seaside city that learned English, bought surfboards, and hired an architectural chaperone to make sure nobody ruins the vibe. Number 2, Leavenworth, Washington. Leavenworth, Washington is in the mountains east of Seattle, and it's a beautiful town, not just during Oktoberfest, which is big there, but all the time. The entire town rebuilt into a German alpine village and committed to the role year-round. Festivals, beer halls, painted facades, Christmas markets, the Cascades sell the illusion so well that you start expecting euros when you walk up to a register. Next holiday season around Christmas, just Google the Leavenworth webcam. They got it running all the time, and the lights are just beautiful. Give you an idea what it's like. Now, tourism is the big deal here. Their downtown is the total German, alpine village. It gets a little different outside of town, or on the outskirts of downtown. But downtown, it definitely's got that whole German thing going on. Now, back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they had some fires that pretty much devastated this area, which in part helped kill the lumber industry in this area. The mills closed and the stores relocated. That's when the city looked to tourism and recreation as their new economy in 1929. That's when they opened up a ski jump. But in 1962, that's when they really turned the corner with Project Life. Life stood for Leavenworth Improvement for Everyone. The committee formed a partnership with the University of Washington to investigate strategies to revitalize a struggling logging town. The Bavarian Swiss Alpine-themed town came from that study or investigation. What's interesting, in 1965, the town led a trip to a Danish-themed town in California, Solvang, to help build support for the idea. It was like council persons and locals and all that type stuff to go down to Solvang, see what they had going on, and decide if that's the way they wanted to go. They did. One thing led to another, and they had all kinds of festivals, and by 1970 they were hosting several annual festivals. And like Santa Barbara, their Design Review Board has been tasked to enforce and maintain the standards of Project Life. Pretty interesting town. Beautiful area, too. If you ever want to go there and you don't feel like driving the mountain towns, there's a pretty cool Amtrak train that leaves Seattle and goes up to Leavenworth. The trip's amazing. If you're heading west, you got to get up really early because all the mountains start happening around 5 a.m. and you're in Seattle by 11:30. Now, if you're going the other direction, you don't get to Leavenworth till about 8:17 at night. So a lot of that, depending on the season, is going to be in the dark and in the mountains, which, if you've ever been on a train in the middle of the mountains, it looks like someone painted your window black. But Leavenworth is beautiful, so you should definitely go check it out. All right, before we get to number 1, which one have you been to? I'd love to hear the story about what you thought when you went to one of them. Or is there one of them you really want to visit someday? Let me know in the comment section. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, New Orleans. Ah, yes, New Orleans, especially when you get down to Bourbon Street. You get iron balconies, courtyards, narrow streets, music drifting through the humid air, architecture older than the nation. It doesn't feel like America pretending to be European. It feels like a parallel timeline where cultures blend and refuse to simplify. New Orleans is a beautiful city. It's just got some crime, and that kind of bums people out. It is a major tourist trap, and it is still fun. You can have a really good time in New Orleans. I don't know if I would ever live in New Orleans or in the state of Louisiana. If you ever do visit New Orleans, I would really suggest seeing some of the things besides Bourbon Street. Bourbon Street is a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but there's so much more to this city to see than Bourbon Street and the little area around there. The food, the music, I mean, I know we're talking about how a town looks, but that kind of builds to the whole thing. The music especially. The history of New Orleans is at every corner. And what I find amazing is it's not hard to find someone that'll tell you about that history. Every time I've gone to New Orleans, and I'm very talkative and I just talk to people on the street sometimes, but I have found people that are very willing to talk about New Orleans and the history. I mean, it's got so much history, it almost makes some people overlook all of its problems, which it's got a lot. But they are definitely one of the most European-looking cities we have here in the United States. And this one didn't just decide like Santa Barbara or Leavenworth that they were going to turn into a European-looking city. This is how it's always been. New Orleans was founded in 1718 by French colonists, and New Orleans was the territorial capital of French Louisiana. One thing led to another, and you had the Louisiana Purchase, and that all went away. In 1803, New Orleans in 1840 was the third most populous city in the United States, and the largest city in the American South. If you ever take a cruise to the Caribbean, see if you can go out in New Orleans. It's a nice place to visit for a day or two before the cruise. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.